Welcome to White Guys for Kamala. I'm John Ennis. This is my co-host Morley. Our guest this week is Democratic Strategist Christian Esperias. And we are here to speak out about the Kamala Harris campaign and do justice to what the modern man can be doing. So I'd like to start this week by talking about shame. It's like embarrassment, but it's like embarrassment of the soul, you know? You can feel embarrassed if you say something like if you're second language or something and you get it wrong, or you misidentify someone at a party and you didn't know any better. That's one thing. But the thing about shame is that, like, it's about something you knew better. You know, you felt something and you knew it wasn't right and it's lingering. And shame can be a force for self-correction and self-improvement, as I've learned. I stopped drinking a number of years ago, and I learned from that process that what happens is when you have a drinking problem, it's called acting out when you get drunk, and then after that you feel shame. And so you can either use that feeling to push against and fight the constraints, or through denial and what causes anger, or justify it or rationalize it, or you can use that energy to help you say, like, I don't want to feel that feeling again. I don't want to be embarrassed anymore. And the flip side of that could be like, well, it's your fault for being so easily embarrassed. You know, it's your fault, honey, that, you know, you don't have a sense of humor, or like, it wasn't that bad, or everyone else thought it was funny, or I'm just blowing off steam. And you can make these kind of rationalizations, but you're still not going to feel great. And that causes resentment and anger. And I think when people say, like, you know, we used to have a lot of shame, there used to be a way to shame people when their politics were askew, if it was racism or something like that. That seems to be not present, but I think it is there. It's just that they're so doubling down on it and so resentful at everything else that's reminding them of it. And that's why when you saw at the debate, when Donald Trump got corrected for something basic, like, no, babies aren't being killed right after birth, there was outrage from the right. They were like so mad about that. Like, and I think that's part of the shame, is that they're like behind some guy who's lying so badly. But, you know, to be called out about it, they're like, oh, now we have to face that. And now everybody else knows that. And I'm just going to yell at the moderators. I'm going to go online and I'm going to say it was 3-on-1 and it's not fair. And why don't you correct Kamala and all these things? Because it's like they're so deep in that shame that they don't want to have to, like, even begin to process and look out. So what are your thoughts on shame?
Yeah, it's funny that this is a topic, because I think shame has been one of those topics that has been essentially one of the pillars, or like the foundation for the Trump campaign since he started back in 2016. Because after the election, I remember there was just so many articles, so many people going out to Michigan, out to Wisconsin, and then saying, like, hey, like, why did you, this was a Obama county, now it's a Trump county, tell me why. And what we kept hearing was repeatedly, like, white working class men saying, I'm sick of it. Like, I'm sick of feeling ashamed, I'm feeling attacked. And the knee-jerk reaction of a lot of activists, especially here in California, so I was in LA right after that happened, something beautiful happened after Trump got elected, which was, I remember I went to Silver Lake, and spontaneously 400 or 500 people just showed up and said, what can I do? How can I help? And that was the beautiful aspect of it. I think where we still get it wrong, and what was wrong then and is still wrong now, is I think people think, well, if I can go to those communities where those white working class people are, I can just make them either ashamed, make them feel ashamed, or tell them why they should be ashamed, and therefore they will change their ways. And I do a lot of research. I do a lot of focus groups, a lot of polling in battleground states, and this is demographic that I'm really been honing in on for the last couple of years. And what I'm realizing is that I think we're thinking about shame in the wrong way. I think a few things. The first one is we talk about, they have no shame. Ted Cruz has no shame. He does X, Y, Z. You know, the candidate for the governor of North Carolina, he has no shame. Right. He does X, Y, Z. Right. I don't want to jump ahead here, but
for sure, yeah.
What I think we forget is that it's not shameful to them. Right. It's not shameful to them unless to your point, like, we used to be able to shame people and be like, actually, that's racist, and people would be, you're right, or I don't want to be perceived as racist, so there I will change my ways. I think what we're seeing now is that we're realizing that there's no more social norms of what is racist, for example, what is misogyny, what is sexist. That the definition has become a spectrum, and it matters where you are on that spectrum. And so for someone making, whether it's xenophobic, transphobic, racist comments, what we consider as shameful, they consider as, oh, I don't want to be aligned with you coastal elites. So therefore, you can shame me all you want.
Right.
It has no impact on me changing my behavior. And so I think shame is one of these things that, like, I think about the carrot and the stick analogy, where shame is the stick. You can hit someone into getting a reaction that you want, but you can't actually change who they are and what they do. And so I think we still see a lot of that shame. If you watch some of the, like, Charlie Kirk stuff online, it's like these, like, really enraged white guys, essentially, right? Like relatively young. And like they're like raging against something, right? They're like, and it's because, to your point, they're filled with shame, right? They can't, and the shame is like they've been told themselves that they're the protagonist in their life, right? I think we all are, but they also been told that, like, well, racism looks like this, sexism looks like this, and I'm not burning across anyone's lawn, and I'm not beating my wife, and so therefore, why do you keep making me feel ashamed when I'm not it? And so we've broken this definition of shame so much that now they can define shame in their own way, and they revel in not being like us, right? They revel in that, and so I think this is the one time I think I might disagree with Michelle Obama when she says, like, when they go low, we go high. I was like, sometimes you got to meet your audience where they're at. And I think this is one of the beautiful things I think I credit both of you about starting this podcast is what we failed to do is meet people where they're at. And I think it's really hard that we put this onus on, predominantly black women who've been carrying the Democratic Party, but really, like, people of color, women, we put the onus on them to, hey, we just need you to do a little bit more organizing. We need you to do a little bit, like, we need to put you up on this pedestal so, like, you can be the shining example. And a lot of people are saying, I'm exhausted about it. And the beautiful thing you folks are doing here is talking to your peers, right? Like, how can we break through the shame of it all and have these one-on-one conversations? Because the truth of the matter is, and what I've learned from my research is that people who look like you and sound like you are the best messengers to get you to change your mind.
Wow.
And so, that's why I'm not sure how familiar you are with, like, relational organizing, but relational organizing is the best kind of organizing. Essentially, it's like, do you have a relationship with someone? That's who's going to make you change your mind on anything,
right? Whether
who to vote for, policy stands, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so all that to say is, like, I really applaud you all for doing this because the demographic we need to work on are men. As a Latino, you guys don't have the monopoly on problematic men. Latinos have a lot of problematic men, and the onus is on me to have those conversations, to meet them where they're at, and to elevate them and have bigger, broader conversations so that we can have a society where we agree what shameful is, but also have a society where we have shared values once again and definitions. So
yeah,
I know I went a little bit long, but shame is a definition of this.
Yeah, it's all good.
What is the carrot in that metaphor? If shame is the stick.
So I think the carrot is the opposite of shame, right? It's praise, it's reward, right? And I think there used to be a reward in a shared unification of what it meant to be a good citizen, a good neighbor, a good American, right? And I think while we didn't have, like, the word for word definition of it, I think we shared it because to your point, like, we used to be able to have either a frank or indirect conversation where people would self-regulate and come back to some middle ground, whatever that middle ground is. And that's not possible anymore, right? Like, I think we're so ingrained in it. And so, as a campaign operative, I think shame could be used for good and for evil. I think especially with the demographic we're talking about, men, Latino men, white men, shame is a big thing, right? Like, if you look at the most popular podcasts and streamers and all that, the reason men like us are rejecting some of these popular streamers, influencers, podcasters, stand-up comedians is because, like, they're shaming us essentially, right? For being too soft or being too PC or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, we're not your audience. That's fine with us, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot there to unpack, and I think there's a lot to do. But yeah, I think everyone wants to be accepted. right?
Right.
Like I think that's the thing. Like if the stick is shame, the carrot is acceptance. And so I think just this audience that we're specifically talking about that appeal to, Joe Rogan podcast or whatever the stereotypical men you have in your mind that it's a slightly problematic but worth saving. I think the shame plays a big factor. Now you look at the humor that and I include myself in it, like that resonates. They're not highbrow humor, right? Like it's not like
Sure.
gets you to think. It's more of like this men culture of like, let's roast each other. Let's go back and forth and insult each other mildly.
Right.
And make tropes of like marginalized groups. That's what it is, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, going back to like there's shame in that for one reason or another. Was bothered or never, like we can have a bigger conversation, but like I think that's where a lot of these people are. And again, this podcast, I think, and the conversations we are hoping to have is hopefully elevate the people out of that area.
Yeah. It's interesting because, you bring to mind, for me at least, when I'm thinking about shame, I think there's sort of the shame that we bring upon ourselves, and then there's the shame that we sort of foist upon other people. I read there's the John Ronson book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, which is kind of details all of the internet and the kind of posse syndrome that the internet has, the kind of, crazy mob that just kind of can descend on someone who does something that the mob perceives as being bad, and then they just kind of roast them. And sometimes there's horrible consequences. People's lives are ruined. They're fired, whatever, But when I think about it like that, I think to myself, the internet has kind of removed the carrot element, because there's not really, and there's a million people that will go and destroy you online. And if you are getting praised, then that just invites more people to pile onto you. Like, I've never seen a post on the internet that has ever been completely sort of like, clearly like, this was a good thing you did. Right. No, like even because then you get even just the contrarians, even if it's something like, oh, this guy saved this, old woman from getting hit by a car. And then there'd be somebody else that would like sort of start putting in some sort of negativity in there. And I think that to some degree that has removed any element of carrot. So then we're just sort of sticking the entire time on anybody trying to make any kind of political statement, because even if it's a good statement, then there's somebody who's superior to that. Even if they're on your side, they'll be like, well, but I mean, and to me, I think this, this campaign has faced that a lot with, the perfect being the enemy of the good or the great, I mean, like there's nothing she can say that's good enough for some people, and I think that, so I think there's that shame that we sort of wield like a weapon, and we weaponized. And I think that the reaction to that is like what you're saying, like so much of these men being like, I'm tired of being attacked for being who I am. I'm tired of feeling shame for something my ancestors did. So no critical race theory. And I'm tired of this. I'm tired of like this feeling of like constantly being attacked. And the weapon of choice in that is shame. And so they use it back and it becomes this thing, but there really is no alternative in that regard. But then the second thing I think of when I think of shame is the shame that we feel within ourselves. And, I think you're right. I think that for someone like Ted Cruz, I mean, I remember coming to grips with the shock that came when there was this idea of we're not going to vote on a Supreme Court justice because it's the, final year of a presidency. We're going to let the people, and the amount of Republicans that were, very, articulate as to why they would say this is not right. We're not doing this. And I would do this if it was a Republican president too. And then just the bald-faced hypocrisy, when obviously when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed, to me, that was like, I was like, I can't, I mean, like it used to be something where it was like, oh, well, they can come up with some sort of like, slippery language as to why this is okay. But that was just like, no, it's just, there wasn't even an attempt. It felt like they were just like the kind of like, yeah, we got it. We won this round, and to me, I was like, the next time something like this happens, do they bother coming up with a reason or, good language why they're not going to do it next time? Are they just going to be like, oh no, this is because this is how we're going to beat you. It's all a game, So that, part to me is what sticks out when I think about the idea of shame. And then the last thing I think about is in terms of self-shame is this. I remember reading about how many people in 2016 when they were saying, oh, well, the polls are all off because so many people went and voted for Trump, even though they may have said to polls or they may have talked to their friends. And there was this like overarching idea that like, it's Hillary. We don't like this Trump guy. He's terrible. But then when they got in there, they all wrote Trump or whatever, or many of them did. And that to me is an interesting thing, the idea of being ashamed in that way, that you don't want to like say who you're voting for, but secretly you like, I really like Trump and what he's saying, you know?
Yeah.
All those things come up to me when I think about shame.
That's interesting.
It's funny that you said that about like the Trump thing in the polling. So I do a lot of focus groups. And so we poll like independent men or Republican men, and they'll say like, man, if Trump would just shut his mouth, if he just shut his mouth, he would be fine. And what that tells me is like, oh, so you're completely okay with the policies, the way he behaved. You don't want to face the public shame of being on his side, being on his team.
Yeah.
Of co-signing all the stuff he says.
It, right?
Yeah, the stupid stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think they don't even think it's stupid. I think they just think it gets in the way of what they really want, which is the policy enact. Because I don't think, like a Ted Cruz, I don't think Ted Cruz cares about the politeness of it all. I think it's the ends justify the means. And so when I talk to these voters and they tell me that is the number one thing we hear from independent men and Republican men. They were like, I don't agree with him saying X, Y, Z, or that. Like they will identify, I know socially that is offensive, or that is not okay, or I would not want my children to say that, or I would not say that. But I agree with it. What they're not saying is, I agree with it though. I fully support that. I just wish he wouldn't say it because it makes me have less social capital. And
you see it on the other side where that's why Project 2025 doesn't seem bothered when Trump distances himself and says like, oh, it's crazy. I'm not going to do anything. I have nothing to do with that. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. Because they know that secretly, like, I don't mind, in the same way that the guys that you talk to are like, if he just wouldn't say something, if he just wouldn't embarrass us all the time with these things that we all sort of like, he's saying the quiet part loud or whatever, and so you see the idea of on the other side of like, we don't mind him saying that because we know that he's saying that to the right things, but secretly we also are, have this other agenda.
Yeah. So,
I got cough.
fine. No worries. So,
Yeah.
as far as the policies that people do like to talk about, and you're right, it is a trick for the Harris campaign to thread the needle so that people on the left will feel like there's someone actually trying to do something for the people and offering what amounts to red meat to middle America and conservative voters. I think the Oprah special did a good job of showing last week all of the different demographics coming together. It was very slickly produced, just like her TV show used to be. And this was a clip that I pulled where she spoke to a young couple in Pennsylvania, go figure, about their economic burdens.
Hi, Oprah. Hi, Madam Vice President. It's nice to be with you all.
Yes.
Hi.
And so what did you want to say to the Vice President?
So, Madam Vice President, we are, like many, many young Americans, just experiencing a very high cost of living. We ended up giving up our apartment, moving in with our parents who were so gracious to take us in for over a year so that we could save money and ultimately buy a home, because that's what we thought the American dream was, to get married and buy a home and have a baby. And now here we are, and our mortgage is incredibly higher than what we thought it would be. And my sister and our brother-in-law are living with us right now so that they can hopefully one day do the same. And while it's beneficial for us because they help us pay off some of our mortgage, it's also beneficial for them because they can save on cheaper rent. But we really would love to know what your plan is to help lower the cost of living.
Yeah, first of all, thank you both for being here. And yours is a story I hear around the country as I travel. And in terms of both rightly having the right to have aspirations and dreams and ambitions for your family, and working hard and finding that the American dream is, for this generation and so many recently, far more elusive than it's been. And we need to deal with that. And there are a number of ways. One is bringing down the cost of everyday necessities, including groceries. So that's why I'm taking on, for example, price gouging. which is when, most companies and corporations are good, but for those bad ones, they take advantage of people, especially during a pandemic or extreme weather, and they end up jacking up prices, and there needs to be accountability and consequence for that. So I'm going to be taking on price gouging. But it's also about dealing with what we need to do around home ownership, right? So as someone mentioned during this film, look, I grew up a child of a mother who worked very hard. She raised me and my sister, and she saved up, and by the time I was a teenager, she was able to buy a home. And we grew up actually for a long time in an apartment on top of a child care center that was owned by the woman we called our second mother, because she helped my mother raise us. And she was a small business owner, Miss Shelton. So I'll bring all this together to tell you the way I think about it is, one, when people work hard and have a dream of buying a home, we should give you the opportunity to be able to do that, which is why part of my plan is for first-time homeowners, buyers, to have a $25,000 down payment assistance to buy your first home. Because people just need to be able to get their foot in the door, and then you'll do the hard work. Part of my plan is what we need to do to support small businesses, because my second mother was a small business owner, and I love our small businesses and our small business owners. They are not only business leaders, they are community leaders. They mentor, they hire locally, and we have so many entrepreneurs in our country who have great ideas, incredible work ethic, but not necessarily access to capital, because not everybody, like my opponent, was handed $400 million on a silver plate that he filed bankruptcy 6 times on. And so part of my plan is to give startup small businesses a $50,000 tax deduction to start up their small business. Right now it's $5,000. Nobody can start a small business with $5,000. So that's part of my plan.
That's a teeny tiny business.
That's a business in
teeny tiny business.
It's a concept of a business, right?
Yes.
You know where I'm going.
That's right.
And
it's still on paper with the $5,000.
Right.
It's still on paper.
It just hasn't happened, right? Part of to speak to you guys and your family and your dreams is what we need to do around giving middle-class families tax breaks. And so part of my plan is also to extend and expand the child tax credit to $6,000 so that you can, in the first year of your child's life, have the resources to be able to buy a crib and a car seat and clothes for your baby, knowing that's such an extraordinarily important time in their development, and you shouldn't have to worry about how you're going to take care of their basic needs. All of this and more is part of what I plan to build, and I call it an opportunity economy. And it's basically about creating opportunities, knowing so many people have the ambition, have the aspirations, are working hard, but just need opportunity to reach their goals and their dreams.
I saw you smiling with that $25,000 credit for the home. I saw that smile on your face and the $6,000. Thank you.
Yeah, so I thought she did a really good job of outlining her plans and then how it's specifically going to serve as a solution for a lot of people's problems. And I think that there's so much, bad faith debate saying that she doesn't have plans or they don't know where she stands, and she's laying this out. I've heard her say this a lot of times already, actually, in speeches and interviews on this. And so I'm hoping that this will start to break through more than the constant slapstick of the Trump campaign.
Right. I have a question for you. In your experience, because one of the things that seems frustrating to me when I talk to people or hear people talk, the thing that keeps coming back is like, oh, but why hasn't she done this stuff so far? And I will say, as far as like, even when it's a Republican president, I try to have some concept held in my mind that like you cannot change the economy in 4 years. And unfortunately, I think the last, probably since, 2016, we haven't really had a consistent vision in the White House anyway that could really, and certainly we had a global pandemic as well. But to me, it feels so sort of unfair to be like, she's had 3 years. Why hasn't she fixed every single problem that was created by a global pandemic? In the same way that I would say it's, that when Donald Trump would make all these promises, I was like, you got 4 years, dude. You're going to do all that in 4 years. You're going to really, and so for me, I guess when you talk to people and they, have this element of like, but how is she going to change the world and and make every element of my life and especially when it comes to the economy, or the other big one with immigration, of like, how are you going to solve a situation that's been, developing for the last, I don't know, 100 years? I mean, who knows? Like just how is it that how does that, I guess my question to you is, what does that look like when you're talking to them in terms of like hearing them out? And do you ever want to just say to them like, look, you're having unfair expectations,
There's a lot I want to unpack here because this is an amazing question that I deal with all the time. And then I, as a voter activist also, right? I have to wear these multiple hats where it's like one time I'm a strategist and I'm like, okay, we need to do X, Y, to Z to win the election. But then I put my activist hat on and I'm like, well, I want to live in a just society. And to do that, we have to like rattle cages, right? And so there's a few ways I want to take this. So the first and foremost is you've had 3 years. Why haven't you done X, right? So there's a spider web going on here. Let's just be really careful. One is she can't attack Biden for multiple reasons, right? Like being a good person and being a friend is one, but also his accomplishments are her accomplishments, right? And she has to be able to like walk that fine line. And the second thing is if she disagrees with him, there's no nice way to disagree with him. There's no way to say, yeah, if I was the president, I actually would have come after the corporate greed a long time ago, but he refused to. There's no nice way of saying that, right? And so she has to walk this fine line where she doesn't slam him, but also sets herself apart, but not too apart, because if she's too apart, then she can't take credit for any of the good stuff, right? So it's this fine line that I think she's mastered it. I think this campaign has run 10 out of 10. I've seen so many campaigns in my life, federals down to like the school board. This campaign is pitch perfect. Unlike what you can do, right? We talked about this before we went on there. It's been 8 weeks, right? But they've hit the ground running. To the other part about unreal expectations, putting my campaign strategist hat on doesn't matter. I don't have the time or energy to go to every voter and say like, you're being unrealistic. Right. So you have to meet people where they're at. And where they're at is, you're the president. I don't want any excuses. I want you to do something. And I think this is one critique I have of us Democrats, is that sometimes you need to go and pound the table. And even if it's a show and even though you can't accomplish it, you have to do it, because there's, especially disenfranchised voters, they're not like us, right? They're not listening to Pod Save America and watching MSNBC and having, deep conversations about this. I wake up, I got to get my kid to school, I go to work, I'm drained, I get home, I pick up my kid, I make food, and I go to dinner, and I start over again. All this luxury of having these philosophical conversations aren't in my bandwidth, right? And so that being said, this is why the AOC was on fire for a while, but really Bernie Sanders is because, was it oversimplification of it? Sure. Were they promising more than they actually could deliver? Sure. But it was something people could wrap their minds around, that they could see themselves in the center of it, how those policies would help them, and things that they were saying the whole time, right? And I think this is the number one thing that I hear among specifically voters under 40, but also disenfranchised voters, like, you're not talking to me. What I want to know is, how does this make my life better, right? I think one of the simplest examples of this was when we had to win Georgia in 2020 after the runoff. And the equation, the messaging was simple. You get me 2 senators, I will pass a stimulus bill that will put $1,400 back in your pocket. It is that simple for disenfranchised voters, because if you tell them about the CHIPS Act and that in 10 years that we're going to be manufacturing chips here that makes your phones faster and smarter, I don't care about that. My eggs are 20% more expensive. My gas is 20% more expensive. My rent is 20% more expensive. You telling me you're going to give me $1,400, that gets me something. So to your point of like unreal expectations, TS. And also you have to meet people where they're at. And so I think what she's doing better at, I wish we were a little bit more better, is like, let's slam the table. Let's not. And I also think, just in terms of advocacy and politics, if you can't have a North Star, we're just going to be thinking small the whole time. And so I do love thinking big, right? I do love when President Obama made like a North Star for so many things, right? He made it around education, he made it around healthcare, he made it about the economy. civil liberties. And did we achieve all of them? No, right? But I love that we were ambitious. And I think that's a big thing. And so
is there a cost, you think, with, because speaking on shame, like this idea sometimes that like Trump made so many promises and they were just, so many of them were hilarious, you know, and it felt.
You saw him get the paycheck from Mexico for the walk?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And to me, it's like, at what point does he ever, is there ever any kind of like regret of like, yeah, I made a lot of promises, I didn't keep almost any of them. I mean, in the case of Obama, I think there was, he had more opposition than he even expected, you know, in a lot of things. And I think, whereas Trump, I think was probably just, you know, again, like promising pizza parties every Friday if you elect him student council president or whatever. And like, whereas should we in some ways utilize that same skill of like, just make promises. It doesn't matter if you keep them, just so that they know this is what you care about, even, you know. Because again, I do think there is a difference between, say, the, you know, ambition of Obama that wasn't necessarily completely realized in every element, and the just sort of out and out, like, you know, what do you guys want? Yeah, I'll give you that perfect healthcare. I'll tell you about it later, though. You know, should we do that? Because I think that sometimes people are saying like, she's not giving us a plan. She's not giving us this. She's also not making a bunch of ridiculous promises, you know, and that I would say is a good thing,
right?
But not if you're trying to win votes, you know?
Yeah. No,
there's a point.
Yeah. So the plan part, I think, I find it hilarious because, again, doing all the research that I do in focus groups, everyone wants, my boss calls it the Betty Crocker effect, which is like in Betty Crocker, when they first came out, to make pancakes or cupcakes, it literally was just powder and water and you put it in the oven and it came out. And people hated it. They didn't feel like it was baking. So they said, okay, what if you add an egg? So if you look at every recipe at home, you just add an egg and it feels like you're baking. And so that's give me your policy stance, or give me your policy. Voters don't care. People always want to say, I will do my own research.
Yeah.
What they want is, they want you to give them a website where there is policy, and they won't read it. They just want to be able to be like, all right, I checked that off. I can be a good citizen, a good voter. So that's one thing. Should we overpromise and underdeliver? No. Because that's the problem with Democrats, right? Like we promise the world and we underdeliver, and then we like, well, those mean people on the other side of the aisle, they won't let us do it. Right?
Do you think we do that? Because I feel like it's the other way. You feel like it's more the Democrats promise.
I do.
We're gonna, you know, okay.
Yeah, like I think we also don't call out our own, right? Like I think like take healthcare. We're one vote away from single payer healthcare.
Yep.
President Obama made the decision not to go after Joe Lieberman.
Yep.
Right. And it came out years later, and now we have a robust conversation about it a decade too late.
Yep.
Right.
And so, and that's internal politics. Like I way above my pay grade on how and when we should have done that and all that. But I do think that, again, perception versus reality. I think the perception out there about Democrats are, even amongst Democrats or center left people who don't identify as Democrats but are differently progressive and liberal, is that Democrats shit the bed. Democrats don't know how to govern. Democrats don't know how to tough it out. At least Republicans get things done, what they say. Is it shady? Is it corrupt? Is it go against my values? Yes. But that's the perception.
Yeah.
And so I think as Democrats, we do have to do it because we're nerds, right? We'll tell you exactly how Nancy Pelosi outsmarted Trump on every single policy.
Sure.
Right? And how we got so much money for roads and, you know, teachers and in cities and all that. It doesn't matter to the everyday citizen, right? The everyday citizen is like, I want you to tell me that you are making my life better. And so the fighting thing, here's kind of where I think Trump actually did fulfill. And I think this is where lobbyists and activists come in so handy. He delivered on what people held him accountable for, right? He said he was going to overturn Roe versus Wade. It got done. Why? Because there was an outside entity pushing him to do so. Because even his own advisors say getting Trump to do anything is like chasing a squirrel. Right? So he doesn't care. He doesn't have a value system or a policy stance. It's just who's forcing them to do anything, right? And so he gave tax breaks to billionaires and corporations. Why? Because that's who had lobbyists pushing them to do the thing they wanted them to do. And so I do think that activism is so underrepresented and undervalued when it actually is what moves the gears of politics. And I think, as cheesy as it sounds, I think the Washington Post thing it says is democracy dies in darkness. And so, yeah, I think we need to have a bold vision. I don't think you underdeliver. But what we do wrong is we're technocratics, right? We overly explain why this policy is slightly better than that policy, and people don't understand that. And Republicans are the opposite. They don't get into the weeds of the detail. They're just going to tell you what the ends are. And I think we as Democrats need to do a much better job of doing that. And until we do that, we're going to get our butts kicked a lot, especially in midterms, where it's a lot less people think it matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to your points, I think it shows one of the biggest criticisms of Democrats is the lack of a long game, like the Federalist Society, you know, angling just on the tax cuts, just for women's health care, just for other things that we really need to be leaning on and pushing on. If it's climate, rewards, certain things, and that's something that I think we need to have the confidence that we can do. And because it's so easily shaken. And you're right. I think besides shitting the bed, I think the main criticism of Democrats is that they play it safe. They're not going to offer too much. They'll hold their cards to their chest. And I think that's what a lot of people felt about Hillary Clinton, and they weren't more excited about it, even though she was clearly a smarter, capable person. They weren't hearing the same. After hearing, the sky and everything that Bernie Sanders was promising, which I think a lot of us were like, well, we just tried the healthcare thing. It came down to one vote, one guy who was the weak link of the chain. It's not really like it can be done, but I don't want to disappoint and disillusion people either, because we have to. It's really not the one candidate. It's this other lame senator who's got fine healthcare but is worried about insurance companies. Yeah. And so, and in speaking about defending the policies and the established successes of the Biden administration, this is a clip of Representative Jasmine Crockett in a hearing. The hearing was supposed to be on failed policies, and she went off knowing exactly the time she had, the ground she had to cover, talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, calling out the Project 2025 creators who were right there, and putting in the context of this election, and it was pretty masterful. So normally I do a segment called Debunking Time, but this week it'll be all her.
Much. You know what? This hearing is actually the best example of what waste, fraud, and abuse looks like, because the only reason we're having this hearing is because somebody got their feelings hurt in a debate. And I don't understand why we're wasting taxpayer dollars. Next time, tell your big boy to show up and be ready to handle the woman in the room who hopefully will become the next president of the United States. Nevertheless, while we do have two amazing authors from Project 2025, which it seems like everybody got the memo, like, yes, I'm going to double down and say it's my thing, but I'm going to make sure I also say that it ain't our homeboys thing, because we know that it doesn't poll very well with the American people, because the American people are woke enough to recognize that there is nothing good in it for them. So with that being said, Ms. Perryman, I'm just curious, and this is yes or no. Is Trump's name ever mentioned in Project 2025? Yes or no? Just yes or no. I got you.
Within the document itself,
yes.
There are a number of references to the former administration.
So is Trump's name mentioned just one time?
I believe it's mentioned more.
Okay. 5 times.
I haven't counted.
Oh, okay. Well, if I told you that his name is mentioned approximately 312 times, would you have any reason to dispute that?
I don't have any reason.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's interesting that we want to try to pretend. We're not going to pretend in here. We're going to work with facts and not fiction. So I also want to talk about inflation really quickly with you, Ms. Perryman, because we've talked about it a lot. I'm just curious to know, is the inflation that we just struggled through, was that global or was that limited to the United States?
Global.
Global. Seemingly, it was attached to this thing called the global pandemic. Is that correct?
That is my understanding.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't just the United States.
No.
Okay, so it wasn't just a matter of the Biden-Harris administration and the United States is struggling, right?
I think the United States actually fared better than the rest of the world.
Oh, yeah. In fact, we are. Correct?
I think so, yeah.
All right, but inflation still hurts, and so that's why we have a candidate that has an actual plan instead of concepts of a plan. Or as I like to say, Trump only has offered concepts of constitutionality mixed with coordinations of a coup. But nevertheless, we're going to move on. I want to talk about the internet really quickly because we wanted to talk about the internet. Actually, let me talk about the border real fast, and then we can talk about Texas in this way. I'd ask for unanimous consent to admit this article from The Hill that says Trump says, blame it on me if border bill fails.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to move on to the internet, and I'm actually going to talk about Texas because I believe that the testimony has been somewhere around the fact that no money has actually been disputed as it relates to rural broadband. I'd also ask for unanimous consent to admit this article from the USDA.gov. USDA officials attend groundbreaking to expand high-speed internet access in rural Texas, dated March 7th, 2024, Italy, Texas.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much.
With respect, that was not the testimony.
Oh, I thought you said no dollars had been spent.
The largest single program.
My question is, did you not say
$42 billion.
Okay.
0 houses have been connected. There are other federal programs, including Trump-era ones, that right now are turning dirt and connecting.
Okay, so just to be clear, because I don't want the American people to be confused, because I was confused, because it almost seemed as if, considering the fact the name of this hearing is the failed policies, as if nothing had been done. But to clarify for those that are watching, you aren't saying that no dollars have been spent as it relates to rural broadband dollars under the Infrastructure Act, correct?
To be clear, for the signature effort, $42
Yes or
billion,
no? Have any dollars been spent?
not a
$1.
single person has been connected. There's
That's
other
not my
programs,
question, though. My
but they
question
have
was,
their own
have
sets
any?
of issues. Senator Ted Cruz from
Okay,
Texas
I'm
put out
going to
a
move on.
report
I'm going to
that
move
showed
on.
that
I'm reclaiming my time at this
for
point.
many of these
I'm
bills, it's
reclaiming my time. With
So the backstory about the broadband expansion that was part of the internet, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the efforts at connecting rural communities with broadband has been held up in Texas, and I'm not sure of other places, over some waylaid efforts to complain about DEI efforts involved in this legislation. As part of this very local effort of the expanding, and so it's been obstructed by Republicans. So, and so when they turn around and say that it hasn't been connected, no housings, they're saying they're trying to get around the fact that they've, the work has been done, but also that they've been preventing and stalling it from being more successful. And I thought she did a really masterful job. I've seen this clip a number of times, and she covers a lot of ground. She doesn't slow down. And she keeps you interested, and she's really good with the asides while keeping it in the right context of whether or not she's asking a question or not. So she became internet famous for the hard crack on MTG, but she said it not to her. She said it to the person running the committee, saying, like, if I called someone else here a butch-bodied blonde, beach blonde, would that be off? And people figured out who she was talking about, but she didn't say it to her. She asked for the right clarity, so she did it right. And she's really good at the parliamentarian parts. So,
well, speaking about her, and this is something I like to do because I'm a nerd, is I like to look at these politicians who go viral. Right? So she's one of them. And I like to always see, what are you doing with this social capital you're doing? And so for anyone who's a nerd like me, follows elected officials online, and see what they're doing with their time, right? Because there's two routes that elected officials do. One is like, okay, I'm going to be a star in MSNBC, so if I ever get voted out of office, I have a cushy job waiting for me.
Right.
And there's others who are playing the long game, who are like, I want to be Nancy Pelosi or somewhere in that space, and I'm going to go to Nevada and talk with the culinary union because I know that too runs the union.
That's right.
Perfect example of this is AOC.
Yes.
AOC's maturity and understanding of politics and power politics is chef's kiss, like pitch perfect, because she has done that. Like, there's no reason why the Congresswoman of the Bronx has any business doing in Clark County, Nevada, 2 years before an election day to meet with the union there, unless she understands the dynamics of power. So she is. So there's a few things. One, she's a pitch perfect for this era that we're in politics now, which is no longer meet the press. Like, that's not where people are getting their news and their information. They are getting it like we just did, virally. Right. Two, she represents her community, and this is why she's elected. Her community speaks like her, looks like her, and believes the same values as her. And I think this is something that I can't wait to see more of, as our country becomes more diverse and the electorate becomes more diverse, we'll see more people like this that are more authentic. And then that's my last point. Authenticity goes such a long way. And I think this is one thing that I think Tim Walz has done an amazing job at owning. So is Vice President Harris. Being themselves, right? Like she's not ashamed of her laugh, right? I think 10 years ago, some consultant would have told her, hey, don't laugh. It's too loud. It's too this. It's too that. But they both embrace who they are, right? He's a dad. He gives dad vibes, right? She gives like, I'm a fun-loving person and I'm loud. Like, I don't care what stereotype that may come with.
Right.
And so authenticity, both aisles, if you think about who are the most popular ones, as much as I despise Ted Cruz is the vile human being that he is.
Authentically Ted Cruz.
Right.
Yeah.
Same thing with Trump. They don't BS you.
Yeah.
And then on our side of the aisle, it's Bernie, it's Elizabeth Warren, it's AOC, it's these people who, and then like they don't even have to be like progressive or far left. It's like just people who are themselves. Like Pete Buttigieg, you can't make Pete Buttigieg be anyone but Pete Buttigieg.
Right. Yeah, you can't.
Right? Like no matter how you try. And so I think just as us nerds, look for authenticity. That's what's going to set apart. That's what people are really clamoring for right now.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I think that it goes along with this just idea. You know, I think about, even as a person who, you know, considers myself a political person and cares and invests time in these things, when I see an ad on TV that's pushing me to vote one way or another on a prop, I instinctually do not trust it. I don't even trust. I'm like, because there's just so many times you're like, oh, actually, as it turns out, this, this thing about, don't vote yes on this is actually run by the cigarette companies.
Well,
they don't,
especially in California.
Yes.
Yeah, we have terrible misinformation about propositions specifically.
Yeah. And so I think because of that, there's an element of just distrust that I'm sure that the entire country goes through. And they feel like I cannot trust anybody. And I think it is especially hurt by the fact that you see such two-faced, qualities come out when things like, oh, well, we're not going to vote on this Supreme Court justice. And then it just completely changes. But I think that you're right. I think that the authenticity element is like, do I think I'm getting from this person the real thing? I think we see that in which movie stars we like, even when we then realize even the authenticity sometimes, many times, is bogus. You know what I mean? Like the idea that that it's sort of a very canned folksiness, and it's interesting because I think back as to all the different politicians, and they all had that element to them, I mean, maybe not like George H.W. Bush, but like certainly all the rest had this element of like, I'm just like you, or, like whether it's Clinton, whether it's Reagan, whether it's George W. Bush, I think Obama maybe was, he did it authentically, but there was still an aspirational element of like, like he's the best version of us, but he still feels like it's true. It's not a bogus thing.
Yes, but I do smoke cigarettes. I do play basketball. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then you look at all the politicians that have lost over the years, Democrats too, and you feel like, there's not an authenticity there.
Yeah.
Even going back as to like Dukakis and, things
John
like
Kerry.
that.
Yeah. I get why people didn't like buy in.
Why it just didn't quite land exactly in that regard. And so, and I think that, sometimes I'll spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, so what's the next Trump? Who's the sort of heir to the throne? And I think that I get some comfort in feeling like it would be very hard to manufacture the same exact perfect storm of a candidate again.
Yeah.
And I think you sort of see it even in these people that try and fail, whether they're Ron DeSantis, whether they're J.D. Vance. I think that they either go too hard in one direction, like a Ted Cruz, or they just can't quite get go all the way with it, like a Chris Christie or a Marco Rubio.
I two candidates to that point that I think of are very similar, even though they're totally different, are Ted Cruz and Elizabeth Warren. They're both very smart. They're both came from the top of their class, Ivy Leagues, and they both, to a certain degree, had to figure out how to dumb down what they're saying to everyone else. And that'll work to a certain amount of people, but not to everyone, because they sort of feel it, and they'll stumble is the problem. Elizabeth Warren will stumble of trying to second guess the game and what role she's supposed to be and what niche she's supposed to be and what part of the spectrum. And Ted Cruz will try so hard on some dumb things that will just it's like, I thought this would go over, I thought they were dumb enough that nobody would question me on this, but now I'm just getting a lot of shit online. line, so I got to try to play with it. And
but
so,
then I think you see it. The women have a harder time, though. I think if you
course.
look at all the different political people, I think AOC, you're right, has done a really good job of creating this persona that is, I believe, authentic. You know, but still something that I think she's aware of how to sort of display it.
yeah,
you know?
she shows her work.
Right. Whereas
she
like
goes along.
you
She's
compare,
explaining
say,
it.
Bill Clinton to Hillary Clinton, and you see how it's like, but I do think that it's a little unfair because women, I think, traditionally have to represent so many different things. You know,
Sure.
They're not supposed to just be kind of one thing that they lean into so hard. They have to be this like nurturing, sweet, but also stern. You know, they have to all these different things. Even in terms of they have to be attractive, but also they have to be able to taken seriously and like be professional. That men don't have to do that. Like Bill Clinton kind of just had to be folksy and likable and kind of like, you know, and like a guy you'd want to have a beer with. Same with George W. Bush,
Right.
you know. And I think that Kamala now is having a similar sort of difficulty with like, she's got to be all these things, but also relatable. So, you know, like make sure that you're performing as all these different roles and make sure that each of them feel like they're true to who you are.
Right.
You know?
And I think one of the harder things, you know, for instance, Elizabeth Warren, you know, and a lot of women, they don't have that archetype as to like what candidate I'm going to be. Whereas for a lot of male candidates, they'll have like, you know, one of 3 or 4 options of what kind of guy they're going to be like. And so, and the same thing with voters, although voters can come around to people if, like you said, there's that authenticity. And, you know, one of the things that often decides who wins the White House is who's the outsider candidate. And it shouldn't be that way. But that's one of the problems with people who've been in the Senate all their lives, like John Kerry, you know, and Biden to that degree, is that, you know, they're measured, they're insulated to that extent. And another thing that tends to define it is who can be a bobblehead. I heard this once that like, you know, you have to be a bobblehead to win. And it's like who's a built-in caricature. And even
Meaning,
Obama.
like, you can become a Halloween costume type of thing.
Yeah. And even Obama with the ears, you could totally see it. Like Bill Clinton, absolutely. George W. Bush, absolutely. Trump, absolutely. You know, Hillary Clinton, no, she's not a bobblehead. And she was never going to be like that overly commodified, like prop, because it's just not her. It's not her style. It's not that she's trying to fake anything. It's just that, you know, she's a Methodist. She's a mom. She's done a lot of things. And yeah, she had to grow up a little bit more policy.
Yes. Right.
We'll pick back up on this conversation on our next episode of White Guys for Kamala. This episode was recorded at Green Lab Studios in Los Angeles, California. Our engineers were Paul Roman, Daniel Amato, and Owen Stinsmullen.